What if the story of Europe's rise to power has a chapter that's been ripped out? A chapter written not in the banks of Florence or the ports of Lisbon, but in the shimmering gold fields of West Africa. For centuries, we've been told a story of European ingenuity, a tale of Renaissance brilliance and seafaring bravery that built the modern world. But what if the fuel for that engine of change, the very metal that financed the cathedrals, the art and the armies, came from a source that history has tried to forget? This is the story of a forgotten power. It's the story of how the immense wealth of West African empires like Ghana, Mali and Songhai laid the golden foundations that Europe was built on. This isn't just about trade. It's about a massive transfer of wealth that shaped the destinies of two continents, creating unprecedented riches in one and leaving a legacy of exploitation in the other. This is the gold truth. Section 1. A world in shadow. To get this hidden history, we first have to understand the world as it was. The classic image of the medieval period is all towering European castles and knights in shining armor. But that picture is missing a lot. In the centuries after the fall of Rome, Europe was, for the most part, an economic underdog. Its kingdoms were fractured, its technology was limited, and its economies were small-scale. Most importantly, its gold and silver mines were running dry, causing a severe shortage of the one thing you need to mint coins and fund big ambitions. Around the year 1250, there was a relatively small amount of gold circulating in Europe. We're taught to see this as a dark age, just waiting for the Renaissance to bring the lights back on. But while Europe was in a slumber, other parts of the world were wide awake. To the south, across the vast and seemingly endless Sahara Desert, a completely different story was unfolding. Long before European ships ever dared to sail down the African coast, a complex and hugely profitable trade network was already booming. Camel caravans, the great ships of the desert, were crossing ancient routes, connecting the Mediterranean coast of North Africa with the savannas of the interior. This was the Trans-Saharan trade, a bustling artery of commerce that moved unimaginable wealth. The main routes linked sub-Saharan regions with rich trade hubs in North Africa, Muslim Spain, and Egypt. And the most precious commodity flowing north: gold. This wasn't some minor trade in exotic trinkets. This was the engine of a global economy that European historians have often just ignored. While Europe struggled, powerful, sophisticated empires were rising in West Africa, built on a foundation of pure, shimmering gold. They weren't on the periphery of the world stage. In many ways, they were the stage. Section 2. The Land of Gold. The Ghana Empire. The first of these great empires to stun the world with its riches was the Ghana Empire, which was a dominant force between the 8th and 11th centuries. Known to Arab writers as the Land of Gold, its wealth was legendary. The empire, whose actual name was Ouagadougou, was perfectly located in what is now southeastern Mauritania and western Mali. It sat in a golden strategic position right between the salt mines of the northern Sahara and the gold fields to the south. The rulers of Ghana were masters of this trade. They didn't just join in, they controlled it with an iron fist. Their system was brilliant. The kings of Ghana claimed every single gold nugget found in the kingdom as their personal property, allowing only gold dust to be traded by the public. Think about the power that gave them. Every large piece of gold belonged to the state, filling the royal treasury and making the king incredibly powerful. Traders passing through were taxed heavily. According to the 11th century geographer Al-Bakri, merchants paid a tax of 1 gold dinar for every donkey load of salt they brought in and 2 for every load they took out. This sophisticated tax system funded a powerful army that al-Bakri claimed could field 200,000 soldiers, with 40,000 of them archers. Now, medieval writers loved big numbers, so that might be an exaggeration. But the point stands. This was a military powerhouse. The royal court was a spectacle of wealth. Al-Bakri described the king holding court in a pavilion, surrounded by horses draped in gold-embroidered cloth. Behind him stood pages holding gold-decorated shields and swords, while dogs at the entrance wore collars of gold and silver. This wasn't just for show. It was a clear message. Ghana was a global superpower, and its power was forged in gold. This African gold started to flow north, enriching the Islamic caliphates and then trickling into the hands of European merchants. It was this first stream of West African gold that woke up a deep, desperate craving for the metal in a gold-starved Europe. Section 3. The Golden King, the Mali Empire, and Mansa Musa. After the Ghana Empire declined, an even bigger powerhouse rose to take its place. The Mali Empire. Founded in the 13th century, the Mali Empire would control an even larger territory and a staggering portion of the world's gold. At its peak in the 14th century, the Mali Empire had become a primary source of gold for both the Middle East and Europe. This era is dominated by one name, Mansa Musa, a man whose wealth was so vast it's almost impossible to calculate, even today. Taking the throne in 1312, Mansa Musa is now widely considered the richest person in all of human history. Modern economists try to put a number on it, something like $400 billion, but the truth is, his wealth was simply seen as incomprehensible at the time. For many in the outside world, Mali was a distant myth. That all changed in 1324. As a devout Muslim, Mansa Musa set out on the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. This was no ordinary trip. It was a procession of wealth on a scale the world had never seen. His caravan reportedly included 60,000 people. He had a personal retinue of 12,000 attendants, each carrying a 4-pound bar of solid gold. The caravan also had hundreds of camels, each one loaded with up to 300 pounds of gold dust. When this river of gold reached Cairo, one of the world's great economic hubs, Mansa Musa, in an act of incredible generosity, just started giving it away. He gave it to the poor, to merchants, to officials, flooding the markets with so much gold that he destabilized the entire regional economy. The sudden influx caused the value of gold to plummet, sparking inflation that some say took the city over a decade to recover from. This one event put the Mali Empire firmly on the world map. European mapmakers and traders suddenly knew the legends were true. There was an empire in West Africa with access to almost limitless gold. You can see the proof in the famous Catalan Atlas of 1375. There, sitting on a throne in the middle of West Africa, is Mansa Musa himself, holding a scepter in one hand and a giant glistening nugget of pure gold in the other. But Mali's wealth wasn't just material. Mansa Musa used it to transform his empire into a center of learning. He brought back scholars and architects from his journey. Cities like Timbuktu became world-renowned centers of scholarship with great mosques and universities. The Sankore University, by the end of his reign, had one of the largest collections of manuscripts in Africa, rivaling libraries anywhere in the world. This forgotten golden age shows a sophisticated, wealthy, and intellectually vibrant civilization that was a major player in the medieval world. Section 4. The Tide Turns. Europe's quest for gold. The story of Mansa Musa's pilgrimage spread like wildfire through the trading houses of Europe. For kingdoms like Portugal and Castile, the message was clear. To become a true power, they needed to get their hands on this West African gold. For centuries their access had been controlled by North African merchants who dominated the desert trade routes. The gold that reached Europe was expensive. The great ambition of the age, especially for Portugal, became finding a sea route to the source to bypass the middlemen. This quest would change the world forever. In 1471, Portuguese sailors, sponsored by the merchant Fernão Gomes, finally reached the shores of modern-day Ghana. They called it simply the Gold Coast. That name tells you everything about their priorities. They weren't there for abstract exploration. They were there for gold. To secure their new trade, they built a massive fortress in 1482, Elmina Castle. It was the first European building in sub-Saharan Africa, a stone fort designed not to protect them from the locals, but to defend their new monopoly on the gold trade from other Europeans. This was a seismic shift. The economic heart of West Africa began to move from the old interior empires like Mali and its successor, Songhai, to the coast. The ancient Saharan routes started to lose their importance as gold now flowed directly into the hulls of Portuguese ships. The impact on Europe was immediate. This new direct supply of West African gold fueled the Portuguese economy, funding its voyages around Africa and into Asia. It filled royal treasuries across the continent. During the late medieval period, a huge portion of the gold in Europe originated from West Africa. This gold was minted into the famous currencies of the Renaissance in places like Florence, Venice, and Castile. This was the money that financed Renaissance art, paid for new armies, and bankrolled the creation of Europe's first nation-states. Other European powers quickly followed. The Dutch, French, and English all built their own forts on the Gold Coast, fighting for a piece of the action. The English established the Royal African Company in 1660, with its main goal being the search for gold. Between 1668 and 1722, this company supplied so much gold from the coast to the English mint that a new coin was created. A coin named after the very region the gold came from, the guinea. But as competition grew, a dark and monstrous pivot began. The infrastructure Europe had built for gold, the forts, the ships, the trade relationships, was soon repurposed for a new and even more profitable commodity. The storerooms in Elmina Castle, built for gold, were converted into dungeons. The lust for gold had led Europe to Africa. Now, that same greed would unleash the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade. The trade in gold didn't stop, but it became tangled up with, and eventually overshadowed by, the trade in human beings, creating a system of exploitation that would generate unimaginable profits for Europe. Section 5. The price of gold. Erasure and underdevelopment. While West African gold financed Europe's economic and cultural rebirth, it came at a devastating cost to Africa itself. This is the hard part of the story, the part that often gets left out. As the Guyanese historian Walter Rodney famously argued in his groundbreaking 1972 book, this was a process of active underdevelopment. Europe didn't just get rich, it got rich by systematically extracting wealth and labor from Africa, leaving the continent impoverished in the process. Before Europeans arrived in force on the coast, West African economies were diverse, with their own internal trade networks and industries. But the intense European demand for single commodities, first gold, and then catastrophically people, began to warp these economies. African societies were pushed and often forced to redirect their entire economic focus toward feeding European demand. Local industries that might have grown were smothered by cheap European goods traded for gold and slaves. This created a relationship of dependency, with African economies becoming suppliers of raw materials and human beings, rather than developing their own self-sustaining systems. The political world was fractured too. The shift in trade from the Sahara to the Atlantic coast weakened the great interior empires like Songhai. Power moved to smaller coastal states and rulers willing to act as middlemen for the Europeans, trading gold and eventually their own people for firearms. This fueled endless conflict and instability. So, why don't we hear this side of the story in our history books? Why is it a hidden history? The answer is that history is usually written by the winners, or in this case, the beneficiaries. The narrative of the Age of Discovery is a Eurocentric one. It frames Europeans as the heroes and innovators, while making the sources of their wealth seem passive or invisible. Africa is often portrayed as a dark continent waiting to be discovered, rather than as the source of the very capital that made those discoveries possible. Admitting that the gold of Ghana and Mali financed the European Renaissance complicates that triumphant story. Recognizing that the profits from the slave trade, which grew directly out of the gold trade, provided the seed capital for the Industrial Revolution, challenges the idea of a purely European-led modernity. It forces us to ask where the modern world really came from. The story wasn't just erased, it was written over. The wealth of West Africa wasn't just taken, it was laundered through the ledgers of European history, its origins deliberately forgotten. Conclusion: the gold of West Africa wasn't just another commodity. It was the current that connected two continents, powering a historic transfer of wealth that funded the glittering palaces, banks, and cathedrals of Europe. From the gold coins of Italian city-states to the English guinea, the evidence has been hiding in plain sight. The empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai weren't footnotes. They were central figures whose wealth shaped global commerce for centuries. Their story challenges us to look beyond the comfortable narratives and ask tougher questions. It shows us that Africa was not a passive continent, but one of powerful empires whose resources were foundational to the world we live in today. The truth is, you can't tell the full story of Europe's rise without telling the story of West Africa's gold. History isn't just about what we remember, but also about what we've been made to forget. The gold truth reminds us that some of the brightest chapters of one continent's history were paid for by the darkest chapters of another. If this video changed the way you see our shared history, please consider liking and sharing it to help this untold story reach a wider audience. And for more hidden histories that challenge the narrative, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Thank you for watching.